Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to this fourth series of webinars around diversity and inclusion in football. The first three, we covered talent identification. We also covered the lack of Black and Asian coaches in football, and also the alarming underrepresentation of Asians, Black and Asian females in the game as well. So today, what we thought we'd do is we're going to bring it all together with the influence and impact of media. And I'm absolutely delighted to present an absolute stellar panel of guests with me today. Just some introductions for you. First of all, I have Darren Lewis, assistant editor of the Daily Mirror. He's also a football writer. There's also a regular on Sky Sports, Talk Sports, CNN, and also Fox Sports. Mann. Leon is a leading sports consultant, filmmaker and broadcaster. He's also founder of the networking group BCOMS, the Black Collective of Media in Sport. Reshmin Chowdhury, a multi-lingual journalist and sports presenter for BT Sport, BBC Sport and Talk Sport. Reshmin also fronts the game day exclusive on Talk Sport on a Saturday morning. And last but definitely not least, Henry Winter. Henry is currently the chief football writer at the Times. He's been writing on football for 35 years, a respected sports journalist that's covered over 8 World Cups, which is quite incredible, and not one of them England's won yet, Henry, but I'm sure we'll get there one day. Yes, fingers crossed. My name's Butch Fazal. I work in the day as a coach inclusion diversity manager for the FA. Top line remit is looking at the underrepresentation of Black and Asian coaches in the professional game, supporting players that are transitioning from coaching, from a playing career into coaching, and also grassroots intentional coaches who are looking at get into the game. First of all, welcome everyone. This is how it works. It's 60 minutes. There's 5 questions. 4 of them, you get 2 minutes each on each question. Before I kind of start, I just want to say, first of all, a really big thank you. I know how busy you are. I know the time that you've taken out, and we absolutely appreciate this as well. And I'm sure the viewers and the listeners will as well. So we're going to jump straight in. Question 1. And it's going to go to Darren first of all. So Darren, what does true race equality progress look and feel like once we raise ourselves from the knee?
For me, it would be a representation across the board that would be reflective of the people who play the game, who read our newspapers, who watch our TVs, who listen to our radios. There'd be more people in my position, in Reshmin's position, in Henry's position. We'd have more black and brown presenters on TV. There would be no need with the best will in the world for all of the excellent work that Leon does to get into rooms with the people who make decisions at our broadcast media. True equality would be a situation where when footballers go to the governing bodies and they report racism on the pitch, it's dealt with swiftly, it's dealt with effectively with a deterrent that sends out a real message, not just to the individuals concerned, but to the wider footballing contingent. I think true equality would give black and brown men and women the chance to aspire to roles and positive positions that they feel confident that they would have a chance of achieving. I think on a personal point of view, it would stop people like me having to tell my kids that they'd have to work twice as hard to be able to get into any kind of position of authority or attain any kind of success, which is exactly what my parents told me, decades ago, and remains still the case for a lot of people now. And it wouldn't just be in terms of representation, true equality either. It'd be in terms of smashing stereotypes, addressing language. There are all sorts of areas in which you could talk about progress once you come up from the knee.
Darren, I just want to bring Reshmin in there. Reshmin, can you hear me? I don't know if she's back in or not. If she isn't, I want to go across to Henry if I can. Henry, it was quite interesting picking up on Darren's point about his parents saying that you have to work twice as hard. Is it the type of conversation that you have with your children as well?
No. I mean, brutally, honestly, I think that the odds are stacked slightly against Darren's kids. I think you've got to be honest about that. I think certainly if I look around the press box, I would say it's improving. I hope Darren would echo that. I think the fact that Darren is in such a powerful position within the newspaper, regardless of press box, I mean, Darren's, I go to matches, Darren decides what goes in the mirror. That's a hugely powerful position. To be in the most respected tabloid in the country and to be making those decisions, what goes on the front page, that is an incredible step forward. Yeah. But look, 20 years ago, I helped John Barnes write a book, and we were having conversations then that we're having now. So look, absolutely, that journey has still got to be continued. But you started off the question by mentioning rising from the knee, and I think all the games I go to, I see the players taking a knee beforehand. Well, remember, they are able to do this at the moment because the fans aren't in the stadium. I think we've got to be completely honest about the fact that when fans do go back in the stadium, a lot of them will voice their disapproval of players taking a knee. So if we think this debate is all sort of going, progressively at the moment, there's going to be a bit of a shock for quite a few people when the fans do come back in the stadium. Look, there'll be many who will support and applaud taking the knee. We saw that briefly at the start of December. But it will be an issue. And I hope the players and the players that I've spoken to, black and white, will continue. And I think they will, because it's a huge issue. But this issue rumbles on. Darren and I cover England. And, we go to places like Sofia. And I know within the next 18 months, without picking out countries that England are going to go to, but, if you head into East Europe, it's even happened in Madrid, in Spain, when Ashley Cole and Sean Wright-Phillips were racially abused there in 2004. When England go next to play certain countries, there will be racial abuse. And the encouraging thing from my perspective, and I've written about this for a long time, is I think the players should walk off. And I think that will be a huge moment when you get players in the England shirt, white and black, walking off. That is just going to be a huge moment, because that will be an image, because it's England, because it's the FA, because all these players are so well known, whether it's Harry Kane, Raheem Sterling, Marcus Rashford, Trent Alexander-Arnold, walking off the pitch. That is just going to be a huge game-changing moment for the sport. So absolutely, I think the path is going in the right direction. We see the sort of the progress. What Darren is doing is fantastic. Leon's BCOMS has transformed our industry. The role model like Reshmin with her presenting. What you three are doing is fantastic. What you do at the FA is absolutely huge. But this is very much a long journey.
It was really interesting hearing Henry talk a little bit about the fact that we don't have supporters currently, and that when right now there's silence when they take the knee. It will be interesting to hear what it looks like when supporters are in the ground, and obviously we've seen a couple of examples of that as well. But I think a key point around Henry saying that players walking off the field of play when they hear it. What is it for you, Reshmin? What do you think race equality looks like and progress looks like and feels like once they are off the knee?
In football specifically, or
yes,
on the pitch specifically? I think it's when people don't have to shout about it anymore. You don't need to have a conversation where you constantly feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall, because that's sometimes how it feels, that you're sort of preaching to people that don't want to learn, and there's no will to learn. And I think for me, it's when you don't have to have those big conversations anymore. Even just from my own perspective, I get approached so much, obviously, on diversity and inclusion. And sometimes I think, I always question people's willingness. Are they contacting me because they've been pushed to act, or are they contacting me because they actually care? And you learn pretty quickly which ones care and which ones don't. And I think, that's the same in football as well. I think it just has to be a point that we just have to reach a point where we don't feel like we have to make a statement anymore. No one feels like they have to, because it just should be understood that everyone is welcome. And that's, I think, the point that I make. It's just, it's difficult when you see negative comments all the time about equality, about why is that person there? Why are they taking the knee? I don't care. Why do we need to do X, Y, Z? And politics reflects a lot of that as well. But I think it's just when you just don't have to shout anymore and you don't have to talk about it anymore. There will always be a minority, always. And that's in any culture, in any open society, in any democracy. And that's absolutely fine. But it's just when it stops becoming offensive and it starts to become accepted, and the people who are against any kind of change are in the absolute minority.
Thank you, Reshmin. Leon, can you hear us now?
I can.
Yeah, just following up on that first question about what progress looks and feels like. For me, you know, when I work in this space, I know the looking is the diverse piece where you can see them, and the feeling is really that environment and how inclusive is that environment. For you, what would progress look like once we raise ourselves from the knee?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's kind of touched on most of the points that I would have made in terms of creating that inclusive environment where we can just be our best confident selves at work. That's ultimately what we're talking about. You know, expecting somebody to turn up and broadcast to 20 million live viewers as you do during a World Cup and not necessarily feel as confident as you could do because of your environment, you know, is hugely challenging. You know, how do you sit down and write what your interpretation of a game, etc., without feeling kind of that inclusiveness with that kind of environment? I think all those things are challenges that we don't talk about as much because of the kind of emphasis on numbers and the optics, if you like. But actually, it's about how it makes us feel within our work environment. And also, I think what success looks like is how our conversations around diversity develop. You know, like I'm the co-founder of the Football Blacklist. And we've been on a journey. You know, when we started the Football Blacklist up in 2009, we certainly weren't talking about Black disabled people and what their experience is. We certainly weren't talking about Black LGBT people and what their experience is. And actually, those people sat, you know, frustrated and not feeling we'd created an environment within the Black community to talk about these things. So actually, part of the progress that I feel we're making is by actually creating an environment where people can raise issues, where they can say, well, what about me? What about people like me? And you know, how are we part of a community as part of this journey? And certainly that's the learning that I've kind of taken on board, and feel like we are, you know, moving in the right direction. And through setting up things like BCOMS and Football Blacklists, you know, it's kind of been symbolic that we're not prepared to wait. We're not waiting for anybody to allow us to do these things. We will find solutions. We will support our community. We will look for allies, and we'll move forward in that way. If others aren't going to get it and they're not willing to move at the pace with the urgency that we require.
Thank you, Leon. I want to move on. Question 2. And the question is, I think it's fair to say we want a game that's equal. I think everyone understands that that's what we're all trying to do. But do you think the game is reported equally? Henry, if I could start with you first.
Well, if I look around the press box, I'll go to your beloved Arsenal tonight. If I look around the press box, I would say still, and Darren will probably echo this, I think it's still predominantly white and male. I do think that is certainly changing, but I think actually and Darren would know more about this because he's sort of on a desk inside an office. But if I talk to my office at the Times, I would say they are far more reflective of the sport that I cover than actually probably the press box. In terms of if I actually think of my immediate bosses, my most recent bosses, I think they're fantastically, I mean, from a very, very, very diverse community, and I think that's probably echoed with certainly a few of the sports desk. But absolutely, it needs to change. I mean, I can remember the morning after the Chelsea game when Raheem Sterling had his incident with the Chelsea fan, and he put out about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Sunday morning. I was just about to ring the office, and I saw Raheem Sterling's Instagram post. It wasn't that long. It's probably about sort of 80, 90 words, and it was so powerful. I rang up. Well, first I texted Raheem's people, AD Ward particularly, I just said, you just rolled a hand grenade through the press box and not before time, or Raheem has. And then I rang the office and I said, listen, we have got to address this because I cannot keep going to matches and writing about sport. And actually, when I look at the press conferences, when I look at the press boxes and look at myself, we are not reflecting properly the sport. I think the FA are trying to move that with the coaching, and I think the media is trying to reflect that as well. But we're still pretty much a white press box. And I don't know whether Darren would agree with this, but I think we are, as a press box, I think it's probably more open now. It's obviously a much younger place. A generation of journalists has moved on. But absolutely, and I look around the press box, because the most important thing is that we reflect and we report on the sport accurately. And I think, having spent time with Raheem, gone to his house, sat down on the back of his Instagram post and listened to him, and him talking about the reporting of him buying a house, or Phil Foden buying a house, or young black players buying a house, and how that is depicted in certain media organisations. I don't really want to single out anyone because I think we're all guilty of it. But things like that, just listening to him, listening to his backstory, understanding him more, that's absolutely vital. But again, it is going to take time. One final thing I'll say on that, which I really think has happened in the last 6 months, and particularly with the analysis of events in the United States and the focus on slavery at home and the origins of it at home, in terms of the cities and the universities over in the UK that have made money out of it. I think the media has very much definitely looked at its language more. I mean, the whole pace and power thing. I mean, I know there were some black players who were thinking of having T-shirts made up, sort of almost mocking the white journalists. And understandably, the whole sort of pace and power, when Paul Pogba was depicted, it's pace and power. Les Ferdinand, pace and power. And I think as a media, we've become certainly more alive and alert to just being more respectful and more thoughtful in the language. I mean, there are one or two phrases I did not know, like nitty gritty. I never knew that had origins from slave boats. So absolutely, I mean, personally, and I think collectively as an industry, we've had to analyse our language and just be a little bit more enlightened. But I think
it does sound like you're on a journey as well. And it's fascinating. Darren, I want you to come in on that piece as well. I mean, and Henry did allude to it, the Danish research body, Run Repeat, who talked a little bit about the study that it did around racial bias in commentary as well. Your thoughts, just expanding on that point that Henry made, but also the piece around Raheem Sterling and the raised consciousness of black players now.
To answer it properly, I actually have to go back nearly 20 years, because I remember when I first joined the Daily Mirror, and I'd go to games and I'd either hear racist abuse or I would see things that were not reflected in the papers at the time, and be quite shocked and quite bemused. And at the time, I was just one person. I was a junior reporter. I had no real voice. The Daily Mirror did really well to try and empower me, gave me the chance to write spreads. I remember an initial spread I wrote all about language, and it barely registered on the Richter scale because, who is this guy? And I remember that game, 2004, the players in Spain getting the racist abuse, the England players. And again, there was an outcry because they were England players, but there were so many other cases in the UK where the noise that was being generated by what had happened in Spain was not reflected when it happened in the UK. And there were points I don't mind saying, I've been quite loud. I know when Leon worked previously at Kick It Out, he was incredibly diligent about pushing these things. And I would imagine, I know that you set up BCOMS because you were as disheartened around about 2009, 10 as I had become. And there were points where you just thought, I'm fighting a losing battle here. And stuff would happen and you just think there is no point saying anything because it won't make a difference. Stuff would happen in the news pages, and even less so because sport has so little influence over what they decide is going to happen in the news pages. And people don't understand that. People take that as you're not shouting, you're not using your voice. And it's not that at all. It's that you're using your voice. And as Reshmin was saying, you're banging your head against a brick wall, but nothing is happening. And when that run repeat survey came out, I remember somebody, who I have a lot of respect for, ringing me up and saying, look, when you first raised all of those issues around pace and power all that time ago, I didn't know what you were talking about. And people just didn't have the faintest idea about these characterizations of black players in one dimension, only having pace, only having the power. And I spoke to Abdoulaye Doucouré, I did an interview with him when he was at Watford, and he talked about how black players are fed up of that and how they are created and how they have vision and how there are so many other elements and dimensions to their game. And yet they are just distilled into these two words, not for any sinister reason or for any discriminatory reason, but I think because football commentary sometimes distills it all into an easy way to describe black footballers. But the problem is that they reinforce stereotypes that players want to move away from.
Yeah.
And so, yes, when there was a lot of relief in some respects when that survey came out, a lot of indication. And I'm pleased to say a lot of understanding from the media world as well, that it wasn't trying to hit them over the head. It was just trying to say, understand what we are saying as black people and they are saying as black footballers.
Reshmin, I just want to come to you on that point. I mean, hosting and being across a number of games, have you seen a step change in what commentary sounds like?
I think so, definitely. I think we're in a real evolutionary phase, I should say, where people are much more aware of the language that they're using and how things that have just come into our normal language are offensive. Like you mentioned, the nitty-gritty, I would never have known that myself either. And it's those sorts of phrases, it's little things that people have been using as a norm over years in commentary and reporting. And I do definitely see the change. I think people are a lot more conscious. I think people don't want to make a big mistake. And that's partly due to the existence of social media, actually. Was a time where, in commentary, you could make a mistake, but it would never be seen or heard of again. And I think with social media, there's a real sort of, whilst there are a lot of negatives of social media, I think there's an accountability as well with social media, because one foot wrong and it will be out there and everyone will know about it and you'll be targeted. And that can be, even if you are one of the most open-minded, white reporters that are out there or white commentators that are out there, you don't have those views. You've just made a misstep, but that will be out there. So I think there's definitely that level of accountability as well. I do think it's just, as the guys were saying, it's evolution, it's education, it's people realizing that there's a change, and it's happened at a rapid rate, as Leon was mentioning about BCOMS and how quickly they've moved in this arena in such a short space of time. I mean, I think it's still not anywhere near what it should be. I look at broadcasters and it's amazing. There are bosses in power who say to me, well, we want to make a change, we want to do this. And I say to them, but you do know that you look at all the major broadcasters, all the faces are white, all the main people on there are white. And they kind of look at me as if I've said something, I've spoken to them in a foreign language. And it's just, but you care, you tell me you care, but have you not been watching all the time? So,
Reshmin, you are bilingual. You could have used a different language for them as well, couldn't you?
I should have done, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Throw out the Bengali. They would have thrown them.
Quality, absolute quality. Leon, I want to come on to you because I think it's really interesting, isn't it? The piece around like the raised consciousness of black players in particular and how they are now speaking out. Now it feels like they feel strong enough that they can do that. And also the narratives, because, we're talking media here and how you influence the narrative as well. Do you think things are changing? Are we reporting more equally now, or is that, like Reshmin has said, still evolving?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're undoubtedly still on a journey, and have things got better? Yes. I mean, I remember being a kid, hearing monkey chants coming into my house through the television, my mum hitting the roof, and me not having a clue what was going on, and certainly the commentator not mentioning anything at all. Absolutely nothing, no word of it. You'd look in the newspapers, there wouldn't be any mention of it either, because it wasn't a thing, I guess, at that time, or certainly there wasn't an environment where people thought, right, well, we're going to report on this. And that's going back some time, you know, in terms of when we had that situation. Now, I think when there is an issue, you know, people certainly do report on it. Those commentators certainly are aware. I must admit, I didn't have a clue what the term nitty-gritty meant. I've never had any black person in my life ever come to me with a complaint about that term. However, you know, can black people be educated on things like this? Yes, because this is part of the education for everybody. So I think it's a very positive step to have all of this information. In terms of could the media be doing a better job? I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, just yesterday, you know, one black player scores a goal, and I'm hearing another player has headed the ball in who happens to be black. So in that case, there's been mistaken identity. Now, I don't want to get on the commentators' back for that, because anybody can do that. But for my team that I watch week in, week out, 3 black players are the same person. And, you know, it's just almost like if there was a bit more diversity in and around that team, then maybe the director could help out the commentator who might have serious issues. I've been in that position where I've been pitch side, and actually determining who is playing where and who's doing what can be quite difficult, depending on where you are. So actually having somebody who is from a community might help with things like that. You know, what's important to communities. Certainly we still hear commentators talking about, you know, footballers being flash if they're black. That seems to be a lazy stereotype that we kind of seem to fall into. There's a lot more commentary on the lifestyle of black footballers, I feel. Maybe I'm hypersensitive to it, but I feel that that's certainly more commented on than others. And I feel because black people are outside of some networks, other players have agents, have PR advisors who are in the loop with people to be able to project the image of that person in a better way than other black players might be in the same way. So I think there's...
Leon, on that point, and I want to keep you on that point for a moment, because the next question I think we've kind of, Henry and everyone else has alluded to, which was around the drive for greater diversity and inclusion, and can it be helped if the media was more diverse? I think it's always one that's aimed at everyone else, and then it kind of comes straight back at you really when when media ask that question. So the work that you're doing with BCOMS and some of the some of the young, incredibly talented people that you have within that networking group. Tell us a little bit about how that came about and what impactful change would look like for you with those aspirational people within the network.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the work that BCOMS are doing with young people, I mean, it's something that I was quite nervous about at first, because actually teaching young people, mentoring young people is a huge skill. You know, both my parents were teachers, so I'd see how stressed out they were at the end of every day having to teach young people, right? And I think that sometimes as journalists, we could say, yeah, I'll do that. And actually getting a call at Sunday evening, 9 o'clock, and knowing how to deal with that from a young person who's kind of feeling a particular way is difficult. But, you know, we've got some good advice from people who are working in those areas, and as a result are kind of helping to mentor the next generation of journalists coming through. And we felt it was important to reach out to them, to give them a network, number one, which is really, really important in journalism or any profession, I find, that's missing for many communities. They don't have a network to be able to get a foot in the door. Number two, know the kind of the things that aren't taught at universities, colleges, etc., about your industry, to get you up to speed. You know, those kind of things that, you know, I mean, I still remember to this day being at a World Cup and Henry coming up to me with one of the press releases with the team sheet and a programme, and actually how great that felt to me, how welcome I felt, because Henry had made an effort to do that. And I was like, oh, well, this is great. I remember Darren Lewis bringing me over to meet the other journalists as part of the pack, saying, this is Leon. You know, all of those things mean a hell of a lot, because actually when you're going into those environments, not knowing people, not having a network, it can be incredibly difficult. And also you can mess up. This was another thing Henry helped me with when I went to a Harry Redknapp press conference. I didn't realise that there were the Sundays and the dailies and everything like that. And I had my phone in my hand and I was about to start tweeting these fantastic lines that every Sunday newspaper journalist would have killed me for. But you need that network. You need.
Leon, I want to bring Henry into this because as soon as you mention mentors and you think about a mentor, 35 years in the game, Henry, you I think you know a little bit or two. Could you share? Could that sharing of that information, and all people that I've spoken to in particular, who've waxed lyrical about the time that you give a number of different people. Is it something that's absolutely critical, mentoring? Because we talk about football coaching and how we need to mentor our coaches. It will probably be the same with media as well, especially a more diverse media.
Well, first, I think we should do it. I think we should help anyone trying to get into the industry. I can remember one of the first games I covered, I was plugging phones in for Haters, a news agency on Fleet Street, and went into the old press box at Stamford Bridge, and there was a very distinguished journalist, football writer there, and I went over and introduced myself, and there was a seat there, and I sat down next to him. I was just intrigued, just to absorb as you do from people you look up to, and he blanked me for the whole game, and I've never forgotten that. And when I got a chance, probably shouldn't admit this, but when I got a chance to stitch him up in the France '98, the World Cup, I went in a day early for the semi-final, signed for his ticket, and gave it to a very nice Swedish reporter. So, you don't forget those things, and absolutely. So look, you should help anyone coming into this industry, and that's why I have particular. I mean, look, we're all on social media. It's really difficult for students who are, or kids at school who want to go into the industry. They contact you on social media. You DM them, maybe swap emails, and then you can. I mean, I just get them to send me the blogs, and actually, it was something we did as an office after Raheem's Instagram message. I just said, listen, if you want to come into the office, sit in the canteen, this is obviously pre-COVID, and look, if I can help you in any way, it's through going through your blogs and saying, well, listen, your payoff is a really good line, stick it in your intro. And, Darren's a master at this. You grab people's attention in the first paragraph. It's your shop window, it's your chat up line. Just make sure you got it. And just talking to it. And that's why I love all the sort of the BCOMS people, because they are fantastic, because they're gloriously pushy. I mean, Leon will know this. They're fantastic because, they're on, I think a couple of Zooms with them, so half-hour Zooms with your BCOM stars. And that is the nature of this business, is to be pushy, is to get on the phone, whether it's to footballers, whether it's to football managers, actually getting onto the phone to journalists and get them to help you out at the start. I think it's brilliant. So look, the platform that BCOM's given, but then it's up to those individuals to take the next step and to badger journalists like me to go through their blogs, and then I probably won't be able to offer them a position in the future, but I can give them some guidance on the way. And that's why it's so important that Darren is in the position that he is in, because he will be able to employ people. I can give them advice, but I probably can't give someone young coming through a job.
And I think that's the key one, isn't it, around leadership and what leaders look like as well. Darren, I want to come to you, and I think that we've kind of covered off that area, but I think that somebody who's in leadership like yourself, Darren, the opportunities that you could actually offer. I want to bring in the narrative around influence in particular, okay? And I want to bring in a quote from Sanjay Bhandari, chair of Kick It Out, talking about the issue of the underrepresentation of South Asians within the game. He called it the biggest statistical anomaly in English football. Do we talk about it enough in the press? Is it something that we can do a lot more around and build a narrative around it? Because it feels like with 4.1 million people, with and that's the 2011 census, 3 times as many as black and mixed heritage people, yet we don't see that in the game. How do we how do we push that narrative, Darren? And is that something that in particular the media have a responsibility to do as well?
I think we have interconnecting strands here, because I think with the numbers that you mentioned, there is a duty on the media, of course, to represent these things, but the media isn't diverse enough. And so if you don't have a diverse media, how can you have people who feel it so strongly that they want to impress upon their news editors that they should be posting comment pieces on the website. They should be putting pieces into the papers. And then you look at the playing contingent and how few Asian players there are in the male and female game, and you realize there is no role model or there is no poster boy to be able to push that agenda either. And Leon will know from when he was at Kick It Out, when he used to put forward players to promote schemes relating to anti-racism. And I used to try, I needed to get a hook to hang it on to get it into the paper, because if we wanted to do it purely based on what we were trying to do, you couldn't get it in. And they are the realities of what we have at the moment, what we're facing. What is optimistic, what gives you grounds for optimism, is that the landscape, as everyone has been saying, has changed. You know, you do have people like everyone on this call who is able not just to use their voices, but, you know, as Henry was saying, and I've got a very similar experience of a fairly high-profile journalist when I started, who I admired and read for many years, and just was very, very cold when I eventually met him in person. And I was disappointed by that. But now I look and I see somebody like Henry, who people would have admired for many years, and speak to him, and they're not disappointed when they meet their hero. You know, they're not frustrated. In fact, they find somebody willing to open the door for them. Likewise, Resh, you know, when people from BCOMS go and they listen to her speak, they find someone who's knowledgeable, who impresses upon them the way to conduct yourself, the importance of learning different languages, being televisual, being able to operate across different media. And Leon said a very important thing. It's not just about getting your foot into the door. It's about knowing what to do when you're in there, how to operate, how to network, how to converse, how to put yourself across. And I think we can only deal with some of the issues that you're raising if we have a media that is capable, well-suited to do it. We don't yet. Our media has changed. Let me tell you, there are lots of people in our media who fight the fight, if you like, better than they had done when we began. They're younger, they're more open, they're more cosmopolitan, and they're much more forward-thinking. But it still isn't yet representative, and that will only change when it is.
There's some real seeds of hope there. I want to go on to the anomaly around black players represented on the football pitch compared to coaches in management. We know that there's a truly diverse pipeline of talent coming through. One of the key questions that are asked for me, especially from intentional, aspirational coaches, be it professional players that are looking to get into the game, or even grassroots coaches, is their relationship with the press. So here's the question. What advice would you give an aspirational coach to build an effective relationship with the media, and what that looks like? Henry, if I went to you first with your advice to an aspirational coach, first job, just about to get in front of that media pack.
Build up a relationship. Very simple. And that works both ways. I mean, fair play to the Football Association with the pro license course at St George's Park. They invite every year a group of, well, pre-COVID, a group of journalists to go in and talk to the players and stage mock press conferences and actually build up relationships with some of these, you know, these talented coaches that are coming through. But I mean, I keep going back to the late great Cyril Regis's comments about glass ceiling for black coaches trying to sort of get involved. I do think that the media can play a part in helping smash through that glass ceiling by building up relationships. So like before Christmas, I got a call from someone close to Jason Newell who said, listen, he's doing great work coaching at Charlton under 23s, but he's really keen on taking the next steps. He's been doing that for a decade and he's done fantastic work. Joe Gomez, Ademola Lookman, players like that. And he deserves the opportunity to actually present his case, his managerial credentials, to whether it's a League One, League Two, lower end championship club, to go into the boardroom and actually be interviewed for a job. So I think what he did was very sensible. He held a Zoom meeting with me and a guy Jacob from The Guardian, and we both not presented his case, we just did a straightforward interview, but he used that opportunity to, you know, present himself as a forward-thinking coach. He talked about what he'd achieved. He talked about the extraordinary journey that he'd been through. He also, I actually thought fairly subtly, said, listen, I reflect modern dressing rooms far more than a lot of managers out there. And that is so important. You know, you look at I hope the next England manager is black, if they have the right quality, because I think it reflects, we have to reflect the society, and particularly, for me, the sport that I'm covering. And I think the dugouts don't do that. The press boxes, as we said, don't do that. So just coming back to your point, Butch, I think that just building up those relationships, look, I would say that as a journalist because it's useful for me, but absolutely, just sitting down, having a coffee, building up that connection. I think the FA are good at that. When like Chris Powell's helping out with Gareth Southgate, I think Darren might have been there. We all had a sort of, 6 of us had a coffee with Chris, and we talked about his journey, his aspirations, and absolutely, when he will get linked with jobs in the future, and because we know him better, his qualities as a coach and his qualities as a man. Absolutely, I think he gets backed. I think just one final thing I'll say on that: when Chris Hughton got sacked by Brighton and Hove Albion the day after keeping him up, there was quite a backlash in the media because of our admiration for Chris Hughton as a man, because we've seen the work he's done with Kick It Out. We've seen the sort of stoicism that he had to endure as a player and as a coach. And there was a lot of support for him because there was that relationship that we have with Chris. A lot of people were standing up. I mean, I got quite a stroppy call not stroppy call, but I got a call from Brighton's board the next day saying, why are you and others standing up for him? And we said, well, because he's a good coach and he's a good man. He didn't deserve to be treated like that. Give someone at least slightly longer, 48 hours to bask in his achievements, keep him up. And that was partly because we respect him as a manager, but also because we have a relationship with Chris Hughton.
Thanks, Henry. Before I go to Leon and Darren on the same question, Reshmin, I wanted to come back because I know you just fell out and you lost your Wi-Fi a little bit. We were obviously talking a little bit about how diverse, how we're building towards a more diverse and inclusive media. You must have been pretty lonely in a few crowded rooms, being a female in the game. What kind of strategies did you use, and what advice would you give aspirational female presenters that look to break into your industry?
Yeah, you're right. There's a great quote from Michelle Obama, and I'm going to probably misquote it, but the sentiment is basically that when you are the minority, the onus is on you to be the one to fit in the room. It's never on the onus of the majority to welcome you in. And I think one thing I really noticed is that, I think culturally, not just in how I look, in terms of what my upbringing is someone who, I watch football on the television. I've had, coffees with big TV executives who say to me, "Oh, you didn't go to football with your dad?" I said, "Well, no, my dad's a risk-averse Asian man. He's not going to take me to football in the 80s and 90s, is he?" It's like that lack of understanding. You're always dealing with people who don't really get your background and where you're from. And culturally, you know that I'm bilingual, multilingual, or whatever. I've lived in England and Spain. I have family holidays to Bangladesh. That's very much, that multi-ethnic side is such a big part of my personality. But you walk into a British newsroom or a British television company and it's just British. It's just white. It's just one sort of linear culture that does not really open up to anything else. And you do find that, not that I've never lost any part of my identity walking into any of these rooms, but you do find that, as you say, people don't understand. During Ramadan, for example, now I've realized actually when I'm presenting, it's very difficult when you're fasting and it just doesn't work. But that lack of understanding and that, being the only person doing that is quite a lonely thing, because whilst people are open to you, they don't really understand. They don't really get it. So I think what stood me in good stead is the fact that this is thanks to my parents and thanks to my community, but I'm very and 100% secure in my dual heritage and my identity. I grew up in a very thriving Bengali community. So when I was younger, my weekends were spent either with loads of family friends, we'd go to each other's houses and our parents would be, talking, making Bengali meals, and we'd all eat together all the time. Or I was singing or hosting cultural events. So I grew up with a real understanding of who I am, and I was never caught in two worlds. I was always very comfortable in both environments. So for me, that really helped. But that's what I would, depending on your upbringing and how that is sort of manifested in the people that you've hung out with growing up, I always say that you've just got to be your authentic self and never be afraid to be who you are, to show that part of your culture. Because now I think I probably do it a lot more now than I did before. And it wasn't as in I show my cultural identity a lot more than I did before. And it's not because I was ever embarrassed by it or because I didn't want to show it. It's just, it wasn't relevant. Your ethnicity shouldn't be relevant in an environment, but you should be able to celebrate it. But I think in British media, you can't, because like I say, there's just one culture. That's all it is. Everyone goes to work, you go drinking, you go out, that's how people get ahead in our environment. It's how people get ahead in a lot of environments, but that is just the one culture. And I think with me, that would be my advice. Be really comfortable with who you are. Be really comfortable with what you represent. Don't be afraid to show that, because that's what stands you out from everyone else. It's not about the color of your skin. It's what you bring to the table. It's that complete understanding that you have of your kind of 360 degrees of your personality.
I'm Reshmin, I'm glowing with pride. I've got to admit, okay, because my wife, every time she sees you on TV, she is blown away. Ballon d'Or, and is she Asian? I'm going, yeah, that's Reshmin Chowdhury. And like, wow, and so for me, okay, you're right out there, and our coming as a Pakistani and a South Asian, but what you've done and the role model that you are is outstanding, and it's a big thank you from you're just keeping it real, sister. I'm telling you, real. Darren, I want to come across. I want to come across to you, Darren, and I'll tell you why. Okay, because I want to pick up on that piece around the advice to coaches in their a coach that gets his opportunity the first time he's in front of a press conference. It's a media pack. Well, Henry's told us a few hints and tips. What advice would you give in particular, especially picking up on what Reshmin said about sense of identity, and also Henry's piece around building that narrative around their own story and getting to understanding and connecting with them?
I think what we have to do is take a step back and recognise just how difficult it is for black coaches to get jobs. We still have black and Asian coaches to get managerial jobs. We're still not developing the Asian players. So how are we getting the Asian coaches? And as far as black ex-players are concerned, I've lost track of the number of black former footballers that I've spoken to who have wanted to address the issue, but know that when you mention the R word, race, that it turns people off. People roll their eyes. People accuse them of playing that mythical race card. It's still a difficult issue in our game, and for me, it's one that we have to crack. It's one that we have, because I think if we talk about what tips they had, we kind of put the cart before the horse in some respects. And I think that I never believed when the FA reformed, I think it was in 2010, and Greg Clark talked about us needing to be patient and things will change, that we would get a decade on, more than a decade on, and still be having this conversation about black managers. And so I think before we even get to a stage about how, in terms of talking about how they can represent themselves in front of the media, we need to get them into that dugout. We need to recognize their talents. We need to, and when I talked earlier about interconnecting strands, language is important, because when we see players, we talked earlier about pace and power and that sort of one-dimensional description of footballers. If we see footballers in one dimension, chairmen and owners will see footballers in one dimension, and they won't appreciate their leadership ability, their tactical nous, their long-term strategies and visions, and all the different ways that they can enhance a football club if they are seen in a different way. That's why this whole thing is important in its entirety. And that's why, I must just very, very quickly, the Daily Mirror, I mentioned them before, and they've empowered me in many, many ways to be able to be honest about the state of football and not worry about recriminations. I must give tribute as well to Sky Sports, who have backed Kick It Out with the kind of finance that they've needed for many, many years to be able to push this agenda, for people like Troy Townsend to go into football clubs and talk to young players and encourage them to become players, to become managers with a profile, with a voice, and to Leon as well. Because Leon does a lot of work. He doesn't shout about it. He's very diplomatic. But a lot of ex-players who come out of the game and want to find a way back into the game, they speak to Leon. They understand that he has his foot in the door. Sometimes the door gets slammed on it. Sometimes they try to subtly ease it out. But he's got it still in there. He's around that table. We need to be around that table, in those rooms, having those coffees with Reshmin, so that when she says to us, things would change if you understood it, we would know exactly what she's talking about. Interconnecting strands, if they come together, we got a chance.
Brilliant, Darren. Interconnecting strands, really interesting point there from Darren. Leon, last one to you around, and I know that this is a question that's come through when I threw it out there and said that we're gonna get you together. Okay, a lot of coaches were asking key tips around building those key relationships. Darren has very much articulated what it looks like just before then. Let's say our pipeline of coaches are there. They're ready to take the plunge. What kind of advice would you give them, Leon? Yeah,
I mean, for me, I think a relationship with the press, which Henry's touched on earlier, but a relationship with your local press. If you have a little look, if you're a manager in League One or League Two, you'll probably find out in your local newspaper. They know everything about their club. If you don't have a relationship with your local club, you are at risk. So actually having that relationship independently of your employer, I believe, is absolutely essential. That's one very practical tip that I kind of always pass on to any kind of former players who are going into that space. I think that there's things that we need to work on as a game. I always hear that it's a meritocracy on the pitch. I think if I was a young British Asian lad listening to that, I would find that deeply offensive, because we know that there's a huge underrepresentation. So by saying it's a total meritocracy on the pitch, it's like saying it's a total meritocracy in coaching and management. It's a total meritocracy in the boardroom. It just isn't. So let's, as a game, stop saying that, because I don't think that is the case. So I think in terms of how we communicate, I think we need to either have a big debate around that, or kind of understand that that's an unhelpful thing to say, that can push exclusion. And in terms of coaches, I think coaching is about communication, right? So if we're all communicating better, communicating isn't just speaking, but it's actually stopping to listen and understand and keep learning. And actually, any amazing coaches that I've kind of happened to be privileged enough to be around are great listeners. They'll stop and listen. They won't always agree with you. That's not what this is about. But actually, they will always listen, consider your view. And the stories I've heard about Sir Alex Ferguson, certainly speak to that. People may not have always got on well with him or liked what he had to say at certain times, but certainly it felt like he was always open to listening and having a conversation and communicating around the decisions he was making, and learning about the society and the people that he was around all the time. So he knew how to communicate with people in different ways. Now, if you have an appreciation for diversity, you'll know that potentially, because of what's happened in the past, you might need to communicate slightly differently with people based on the things that they've been through and experienced as part of their journey.
Superb. Thanks, Leon. Final question, injury time. Here it is, 1 minute. You're looking ahead 4 years, and I'd really be interested in to hear what your commentary in 60 seconds would look like 4 years from now. Henry, over to you, sir.
The catalyst for change will be Darren in the editorial conference, making a difference there. It will be Leon at BCOMS with a launch pad for a young journalist's career. It will be Reshmin as a role model and as a fantastic reporter. Butch, it will be you at the FA, talking, guiding people. But I think also the catalyst for change will be the players. You look at Marcus Rashford, the work that he's done, running rings around the Prime Minister, feeding the kids of this country. You look at the work that Raheem Sterling has done by example and by word on race relations. He's been superb on that. I think the future leadership of the game and maybe of the country itself will come from within the dressing room. And I think that's when the glass ceiling will be broken for coaches, black coaches, to rise up into management, because the power of the players may be going in onto boards of clubs, maybe going onto the boards of the Football Association, influencing the media more. So I think the salvation, a lot of the salvation, as well as the company today, will come from the dressing room and players like Rashford and Sterling.
Thank you so much, Henry. That's outstanding. Leon, 60 seconds. What does it look like in 4 years' time?
I think the players are going to play a huge role, as Henry said, in terms of kicking that door in, because they're the only ones, frankly, who have the power to do that, sadly. Once they kick that door in, I really hope that the change that comes means that young men and women never have to be in a position to have to drive the change. Actually, the game does the job well enough to look after them, so they can just concentrate on turning up to play football at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, as opposed to having to be campaigners. Some of it is natural to them, and we encourage them to do that. But it should not be on 21, 22, 23-year-olds to change a game that has people who are very, very well paid to lead. So we need our leaders to lead, but it'll take the players to kick the door down at first, and we should encourage them, support them to do that.
Thank you, Leon. Darren, you have 60 seconds. It's 2024. What does the commentary sound like?
To be honest with you, I'm going to pick up on what Leon has said, because I remember recently in a conversation with Michael Richards, talked about the fact that the players, when Sterling started speaking about his representation in media, he set in motion a chain of events that will hopefully lead to footballers determining the way that they are portrayed and enforcing, holding us as a media accountable if we make a misstep. I think I want to be optimistic and say that in 4 years, the FA will continue the work that it started. I know it's difficult, but it will be more diverse at the very highest level, so that when players look up at the top, they see a governing body that is representative of the people who play the game, black, Asian, white. I am hoping also that in 4 years' time, the media also is more representative of the people who consume us, whether in print, online, on the TV or on the radio. I want to stay optimistic and say that that can happen, largely because the landscape has changed since in the last 5 years. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful.
There's been a lot more discussion about what should happen. And I think the pace of development in that time has not been quick enough. So I would hope that in the next 4 years, there would be some sort of catch up where we're starting to see real change, where real people who are qualified to be in the top positions, whether that be in the media, whether that be in coaching positions, whether that's at a club boardroom, whatever that might look like. I hope that the pace of the progress will be a lot quicker, and that also, it takes time. If the talent pool in whatever area you're talking about isn't as big as it should be because of previous barriers to entry, it takes time for people to train and get to that level as well. So I would hope that somewhere along the line there would be a bit more equilibrium. I still think that we're probably a generation, maybe even two, dare I say, from genuine equilibrium where you don't have to have these conversations anymore. But I think, you've got to allow a bit of time for catch up. I think, as I say, the pace has been good so far. I just think that in 4 years' time, I hope we'll be just a little bit closer to where we want to be. And people feel a lot more welcome in a certain environment, and people feel that they belong. Whereas I think up until now, it's been a lot, the spotlight is on, well, do they belong there? Do they deserve to be there? And these are questions that shouldn't be asked, because you need people who are qualified to be in top positions. So that's where I hope that we'll be a bit closer towards in the next few years.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. It was informative. It was incredibly insightful, and it was inspirational. And I really appreciate the fact that you took so much time out. So thank you very much.